going to read the whole chapter, bit by bit. But for those who have been deathly ill, I know the whole Marsh family has been terribly ill, right? Are you okay now? Are you back to reinfect the rest of us? Remember, the church that is sick together sticks together. You may not know that. Okay. But I noticed they're all sitting on that side. So let's just kind of summarize what's been going on. God in Genesis chapter 12 called Abram. As Abram didn't start this, God did. And he says, what I want you to do is I want you to leave your father, leave your country, and I want you to go to a place that I will show you. And in obedience, he left. Took with him his property, his wife, and his nephew, Lot. And in this journey, do you remember as they're traveling, the final place where God puts them, it was called starts with an F. A famine. A famine. And instead of sticking where God has put them, they moved to Egypt. And in Egypt, Abram, instead of walking by faith, he's walking by fear. And he tells his wife, listen, we're kissing cousins, we're closely related. So do me a favor, so they won't kill me. Let them just go ahead and destroy our wedding vows and everything like that. And just tell them you're my wife, and you'll go into the Pharaoh's harem, and I'll get some camels, and everything will be fine. It's not exactly what he said, but it's pretty close to what happened. And then Pharaoh said, at the end, I believe it was before Sarah was touched inappropriately. Pharaoh says, what have you done? And he says, well, actually, this is my sister. And Pharaoh says, get out. And Abram leaves with his wife, his nephew, his possessions, and a lot more possessions, but with some issues. Then chapter 13, we see Lot and Abram, their herdsmen, are fighting with each other because there's too much stuff. And by the way, where did Abram go right after Egypt? He went right back to the same place in the middle of a famine. He says, God, I'm going to the same place where I left. And from there, because of the problem, Abram said very humbly, Lot, you can go any direction you want. I'll take whatever's left. And what does good old nephew Lot do? He sees the well-watered plains and he takes all of it. Because it reminded him of the well-watered plains of Egypt. They got out of Egypt, but now Egypt was sticking inside of Lot. And he left, and we know scripturally that he begins to long after Sodom, that wicked city. In the meantime, God reminds Abram that he's still the Lord and he's still going to keep his promise. Then in chapter 14, we see that there's a rebellion that involves the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah. And the only reason why that's even important is because Lot is in Sodom and Gomorrah. Lot is kidnapped. And Abram gets some of his servants, moves in, frees his nephew, defeats the conquering armies. And the king of Sodom is so happy for it. And he says, I'll tell you what, you can keep all the spoils. I just want all the slaves back. And Abram says, I'm not taking anything from you. I'm not giving you anything. I don't want you to think that any blessing I have comes from you because of his wickedness. And then we have Melchizedek, the king of Salem, coming. And he blesses him. And that's where Abraham gives Melchizedek tithes. And Abram is blessed. And we see Lot, instead of returning to Abram, he goes and he makes his home in Sodom. Now, this is where we are. Chapter 15. Are we there? Genesis chapter 15. And after these things, after what things? After the big battle, after the king of Sodom, after Melchizedek, after all these things, the word of the Lord came unto Abram in a vision, saying, Fear not, Abram, I am thy shield and thy exceeding great reward. Now, let me ask you a question here. He just had a great victory, didn't he? So why is he afraid? Now, one thing I do want you to notice is that this is going to be at night. We're going to read a passage where God encourages Abram by saying, go outside, look at the stars. If you could even number them, that's what your descendants are going to be. Abram is full of fear at this moment. And again, I think this was for some reason. Do you ever... Now, there's fear, there's phobias, aren't they? Mine are pretty evident. If there's a spider, me and James, we're running out of here. All right? We know that. I also am not a big fan of heights, though I'll go up them. I'll kill spiders if I have to. But, there's other people that have fears. Anybody afraid of clowns? There's people that are afraid of milk. Do you know that? Yeah. You're afraid of milk? Okay. Yeah. Yeah, there's tons and tons of phobias. But that's not what we fear at night, is it? I want you to think about at night when you get that anxious feeling, it's not that some spider is going to be crawling. Well, maybe for us, but it's it's not that. It's none of those things. It's fear. Ready? It's fear of the future. It's fear of the unknown. We don't fear the past. Sometimes we fear what the past will do to our future, but we don't fear the past. We don't fear the present. We fear the future. We deal with the present. And Abram is fearing. Abram is fearing about his future. Maybe he's worried that those kings that were defeated are going to regroup and try to get a little bit of retribution. You might say, well, that's silly. He just had a great victory. Do you remember when Elijah called down fire from heaven? Pretty cool, right? Has anybody in here ever called down fire from heaven? I'm going to say that if you call down fire from heaven, you probably have a good prayer life with God. Amen? Okay. Elijah, the servant of the Lord, calls down fire from heaven. Whoosh, right? In the meantime, before that, he's mocking the prophets of Baal. He's making fun of them. He's making fun of their gods. That's not very nice. Well, that's what he did. And then he called down from fire from heaven. It ignited. It was amazing. And then he says, all right, any prophets of Baal that are left alive, kill them too. Now, this is not telling us to go kill prophets of Baal. This is simply that in the nation of Israel, who was God? Jehovah, Yahweh. Who runs the country? Same person, by the way. Jehovah. And when there's a false prophet, it is actually an act of treason to dethrone God. And by the way, what do we do with traitors? If you're not sure, remember the 5th of November. We hang them, we burn them, and we throw a party about it. Right? And so Elijah said, kill all them. Well, next thing you know, he gets word from sweet old Queen Jezebel. And she says, I give you my word that the same thing that happened to my prophets is going to happen to Elijah by tomorrow. He called down fire from heaven. He had the people on the side. They did. And then what does he do as soon as he hears that? He goes and hides. If you will, sometimes, this is biblical, of great emotional success, the top of the mountain, there is a valley of depression. There's a valley of anxiousness. I know good Christians aren't supposed to have depression or anxiety. Amen? But I think we can see in Scripture that's what happens. We see God move amazingly, and then we get thrown off kilter. And you know what I love? What God did with Elijah? He didn't say, Elijah, you sorry sack of potatoes, get up and get out, get going. He says, wait here. I'm going to bring some birds and they're going to bring you some food. And he lets Elijah eat and rest. Remember, when things go bad, have a snack and take a nap. I don't think that's the most spiritual lesson we can get from that. But surely rest and food are very important. Well, here we see, if you will, Abram in the same kind of situation. What a great victory he had, right? He had just a few hundred soldiers, and they defeated other armies. So maybe he's worried about them. Maybe he started reconsidering life after so much death. Maybe he realized my life is but a vapor. We can't see that yet, but I reckon in about another month, we're going to go outside and we're going to see vapors. When I grew up in Florida, okay, we very rarely had those days. But every few years, it gets cold enough where you could see your breath. And we Floridians, we're just outside breathing. You know, we are breathing for the fun of it. That's what us Floridians do. That and wrestle gators. All right? But we have, but that's what life is. Life is but a vapor. It appears and goes away. Do you realize that Raiders of the Lost Ark, how many of you know Raiders of the Lost Ark? Yeah, that movie's 40 years old. Do you realize when that movie came out, 40 years before that would have been almost the beginning of World War II, or at least the middle of it. But for me, I'm like, wow, this is a great movie. It's not that old, 40 years. Whoa. Star Wars, 45 years. These are the good stuff, man. What I'm saying is 45 years just flies by. Sometimes I miss my age by a decade. Somebody's asking how old I was, and I think I said 31, and my wife says, how old are you? Like 31. And she says, you're 41. I'm like, oh, where did a decade go? But that's how quick life is. Maybe Abram was considering life and death. Maybe he considered the resources that he lost in that previous incursion. You know, maybe he had men die. Maybe he lost things. Maybe he's considering the things that he didn't get that he could use. And God starts off, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision, and the very first thing he says is, fear not. I want you to think of this phrase, okay? Fear not, for I am. Fear not, for I am. Constantly, when we are in a life of fear, it is almost impossible to be in a life that's trusting Christ. We are either going to let fear control us, circumstances control us, or we're going to let the God who is above our circumstances control us and direct us. Real faith will focus on God. It won't focus on the problems. God says, fear not, Abram. I am thy shield. I am thy exceeding great reward. This is what makes me think he was worried about two things. He was worried about his life, and he was worried about his finances. And those were giving him a different thought, because in verse 2, Abram said, Lord God, what wilt thou give me, seeing I go childless? And the steward of my house is this Eleazar of Damascus. And Abram said, Behold, to me thou hast given no seed, and lo, one born in my house is mine heir. You may not understand this, but in biblical times, if you don't have a child, the steward of the house, when you die, he then is the first for the inheritance. He is the main heir. He is the heir if you don't have any children. In these times, now you have to understand, Abram might be considering Lot. Okay, we haven't had kids. Maybe you mean Lot, because back in the ancient days, in that area of the world, when your brother died, you took that person's child, and he was just part of your family. There was no ceremony. It was just, he was somebody else's son. Now he's your son. It was just automatic. Maybe he thought God's promises were going to go through that way. But like a punch in the mouth, Abram realizes quickly, now that Lot is gone and he's well gone, that that's not how God's going to answer his promise. Have you ever been there where you thought surely God was going to answer you a certain way, and that way was just destroyed, that way was devastated, that way never happened? And you're left thinking, well, what now? This is a true story. Dakota wasn't born yet. My wife will be able to verify this. In 2002, 20 years ago, we were on deputation, and we had a whole series of meetings for about a month and a half, 2 months, cancel on us one after the other. And we were just starting out as church planners. We had no money. But in the beginning, we said, all right, God, if you're calling us, you're going to have to provide for us. We're not going to make this thing happen. If this is what you want us to do, you're going to have to provide the resources. And so this is in the Midwest of America, like Iowa and Illinois. And then our next group of meetings were in Texas, and we just barely limped into Texas. We didn't know what we were going to do. We didn't know where we were going to stay. We found a church that actually said, hey, we have an apartment you can use in the church. You could use the kitchen. Everything's great. Wonderful. And you guys know about July 4th, right? Colonial Insurrection Day, right? Treason Day. July the 4th, Independence Day. Well, on July 3rd, we had, when I say we had no money, I mean as literal as possible. We did not have any money whatsoever. July 3rd was a Wednesday night. And I wasn't too worried about it, because in my pocket was an uncashed check. So I just figured we would leave a little bit early before the evening meeting. We would go cash the check at the local bank where that's from, and then we would get food, get gas, no problem. Get out to the car and notice that the wheel, the tire on the car, the radial wires are sticking out. Am I telling the truth so far, honey? That's not good, but it'll probably last. So we drive to the bank, and we get to the bank, and the bank has a sign. It's this little old country bank, and the bank has a sign saying, we're closed early for Independence Day. We'll see y'all Friday. Oh. It's like, okay, well, I don't know what else to do. So we just slowly drove to the meeting that we were supposed to have in Texas. It was a couple hours away. And when we got there, and by the way, you know what my heart said? At first, my heart says, I'm going to get this money by cashing the check. And then when that fell through, I went, oh, Damien, you need to be more spiritual in this. I know what's going to happen. You're going to meet this pastor, and the pastor's going to go, hey, brother, do you guys have any needs? And we're going to tell them about our needs, and everything's going to be taken care of just like that. Now, I need you to know that we don't tell people our needs. We don't. Okay? Because, again, we feel that God will provide. Now, sometimes we feel that God may have somebody ask us a need. We'll talk about it then. But unless that happens, nobody knows. So we meet this pastor, right? And he meets us at the front door of his church, and he says, Brother Pickett, how are you doing? I went, well, we're doing fine. He says, brother, do you have any needs? I'm like, oh, God, you're so cool. All right, yeah, we do. My family hasn't eaten today. That's one. Two, I have a tire that's going to blow soon and needs to be replaced. It's like, amen, brother. Come on, let's have a good meeting. And I preached, and everything was going well. And, at the end, we're kind of hanging around, or we're going to get directed to a hotel, something. And so we're just kind of waiting in the back of the church. And the pastor says, oh, I didn't see you there. And he walks back, and he walks us to the back door, and we go outside. And he says, hey, Brother Pickett, I want you to know it was a real privilege to have you. So I'm trying to lay a little hint. Are there any hotels in the area? Hopefully that we'll be thinking. And he says, yeah, there's just a bunch down the street. Go to any one of them. And God bless you. If you're ever in town, let's have lunch. Poof. And he closed the door. Man, I did not think it was going to work out that way. And so now both situations, for my family to eat and for us to get a wheel fixed, the door was just closed, slammed, really. And I remember driving back, and I remember looking out the window saying, God, do you know we're here? We're hurting right now. And we drove, and that tire's going, grr, 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 grr. We made it. By the way, something came in my head. I remembered something. There was a family at that church that was going to do a big July 4th barbecue. And I said, all right, God, I get what you're going to do. We have a little bit of minced meat, and we have a little taco kit. We're going to eat tonight. That won't be a problem. I mean, the kids were hungry. Honestly, Damien Jr. was crying. He was hungry. And I felt like a worthless dad because there was nothing I could do about it. But I remember, okay, we're going to have taco meat. And that next day, there was a family at church that was going to do this huge Texas-style barbecue. And we were going to eat good. And then I just cashed the check on Friday. Not a problem. We get to the place where we're staying at the church, and there's a little note on the door. I go get the note, and it says, Dear Brother Pickett, we've had a family emergency. Sorry, we won't be able to see you tomorrow. I'm telling the truth so far, aren't I? I just want to keep on verifying because it almost sounds like this is a made-up story. So we cook the taco meal, we eat it, and I just assume July 4th we're just going to go without food. A lot of people in the world do it. That doesn't mean God has forsaken us. I just figured that's what's going to happen. Well, we go to sleep, and I'm having a rough time. My wife's now having a rough time. And when I wake up, somebody's calling my mobile phone. And I figure it's some other church canceling another meeting, and I just don't want to talk to anybody. And my wife's like, honey, your phone's ringing. I know my phone's ringing. I'm not answering it. She says, well, you should. It'll be polite. I'm like, I don't care about being polite. I just want to be left alone. So to make my wife happy, I answered the phone. And on the other end of the phone was like, is this Damien Pickett? Yes, it is. It's like, man, I have been trying to get your number, and I'm so glad I got it. Last night, God's been telling me I've got to get in touch with you, and I've got to send you some money. This was my old youth pastor that I hadn't even seen in 10 years. He lived in another state. We never saw him, never called him or anything like that. God told him to get in touch with us, to send us money. And how much, I forget how much money did we get that day? 350? Do you know what it's like from having like no money to 350 bucks? We got it via Western Union. There was a little grocery store that was still open, and sure enough, we got the money from Western Union, and man, we had a great time grocery shopping. We weren't worried about, we just bought everything, man. We were having a great time, bought fireworks for the kids. That store also had a place to get the tire replaced. Everything was going on great. The reason why I'm telling that story is it seemed like we were going to die. It seemed like though we were trusting God, every time he had a chance to bless us, it seemed like those avenues of blessing shriveled up, dried up, and it hurt. And there was fear. And I get why Abram, after all this time, says, how long? What wilt thou give me, seeing I go childless? Did Abram ask for a promise of a child? No. This was an unrequested promise. So this started with God. And he says, God, you're the one that brought this up. How long? I think there came a point in Abram's life as he's thinking, what is God even doing? Are you even doing anything? Remember, this is great Abram, you know, the one that chapter of Romans says, Abraham believed God and it was counted to him for righteousness. And Abram's at this point saying, what's going on? Christian, let me tell you something. It is not bad for you to sometimes say, God, what's going on? Man, I sure don't get what's going on. I don't get it. Isn't that what David did? And by the way, God's promise certainly wasn't being answered by the things that Abram feebly imagined. Now, there was a twofold lesson that God was trying to teach Abram. And here's the lesson. It's twofold. Number one, God is not constrained by our timetable. Do you get it? We're in a rush. God sees everything from end to beginning. He's in no rush. God is not constrained by our timetable. And number two, God does not need our help. He's not constrained by our timetable, and God does not need our help to complete his promises. Verse 4 says, and behold, the word of the Lord came unto him, saying, this shall not be thine heir. Eleazar, your servant from Syria, from Damascus, he's not going to be your heir. But he that shall come forth out of thine own bowels shall be thine heir. Now Abraham's saying, what in the world's going on here? And he brought him forth abroad, verse 5, and said, look now toward the heaven and tell the stars if thou be able to number them. And he said unto him, so shall thy seed be. By the way, I love that God reminded Abram of his promise, where whenever Abram feared at night, he can just go outside and look up and be reminded of his promise. Do you think God cares for you? Yeah, I know that, but I want you to really think, do you think God cares for you? Do you think Abram at this period of time was feeling the care of God in his life? He was so confused, wasn't he? But he goes to the right source. He doesn't complain to everybody. God says, fear not. And he says, well, speaking of not fearing, when's this promise going to be answered? In verse 6, this is one of the greatest chapters in the scripture, by the way. In verse 6, it says, and he, Abram, believed God, and he, God, counted it to him, Abram, for righteousness. Doing X has never been the way to righteousness before God. I hear people all the time, well, in the Old Testament, in order to be saved, you had to keep all of these things and all of these things and all of these things and all of these things. That's an old Hebrew word. No, that's never been the case. You know why? Because they were never able to keep it. It's never been doing all these things will finally get God to like you and to redeem you. What does the scripture say here? He believed God, and it was counted to him as righteousness. This is faith. Righteousness has always come through believing God. There's never been a time where righteousness was earned by good works. It has always been by believing God. Hudson Taylor, the founder of the China Inland Missions, also known as the father of modern missions. There was a great event in Chinese history called the Boxer Rebellion. And the Boxer Rebellion, it was known as the Boxer Rebellion because the Chinese that were involved in this were called the Fists of God. And they were going to get rid of all Westerners and everything to do with Westerners. And so the persecution of Hudson Taylor and all the missionaries and all the converts to Christianity were being beaten, killed, heavily persecuted. And he said this. He says, I cannot read. I cannot think. I cannot even pray. But I can trust. You won't always be in a position where things are amazing, where you can stop and pray and stop and read the scriptures and stop and fellowship and think. Sometimes all you're going to be able to do is trust, and that's enough. Verse 7, after Abram believed God, verse 7 says, I am the Lord that brought thee out of Ur the Chaldees to give thee this land to inherit. Remember, fear not, for I am. And Abram said, Lord God, whereby shall I know that I shall inherit it? Now, come on. Let me ask you a question. Now, I'm not talking about crazy time. I'm just talking about realistically. When God speaks to someone, and when God says, I will do it, should that be enough? I hate repeating myself. And you know what? This is something that I have to work on. Just personally. I could even be short of my wonderful wife. My wonderful wife yesterday said, oh, if I go to Costco and bring this person, can they do shopping? Yes. And can they use their card? Yes. No, I mean their debit card. Yes. Well, are you sure? Because I didn't want to answer anymore. I've already said yes very, very clearly. But she's a person who I love, and I need to be very patient with that. But sometimes I think, when God speaks and they go, oh, how do I know? How do I know, God, that you're going to keep your word? How about this bolt of lightning that just hit you? Does that help? I mean, okay, aren't you glad God's not like us? Amen? But I really think right after the scripture says, Abram believed God and it was counted to him for righteousness. Then he says, but how do I know you're going to do it? Isn't that amazing? I love that came after that. Because I think, oh, Abram and everybody else in the Bible, they're a lot like me. God, I believe you, but help my unbelief. King David asked questions like this. Lord, you say I'm blessed, but I'm not feeling it. You say I'm king, but I'm being chased around like I'm not. Remember the person, the dad that came to Jesus? He said, my son, he's got a demon. He's throwing himself in the fire. He's hurting himself. Jesus says, believe and he'll be healed. The man says, I do believe, but help my unbelief. I love that. That's as genuine as it ever gets. Jesus, I believe you can do it. I don't see how you're going to do it. It feels like it's never going to get done. Jesus, I know you can. And if you say you will, I know you will. And Jesus, I want to have the kind of faith that you say I need to have for this to happen. Doesn't the Bible say that he knows we are but dust? When's the last time you think you disappointed God? Let me rephrase this. When's the last time you did disappoint God? Do you think God's in heaven wringing his hands saying, oh, I was going to use faith, but then she did that. I don't even know what I'm going to do now. Or do you think God says, if I would have only known Chris was going to do that? He knows the end from the beginning. And yes, we need to be clean vessels. Yes, we need to do what's right. I'm not interfering with that. But what I'm saying is God knows our heart before we even speak our heart. And he has promised, and I love this promise, to conform us to the image of his Son. Verse 9 says, and he said to him, okay, God says, you want to know how I'm going to do it? I'll tell you how I'm going to do it. Take me a heifer, a cow, of 3 years old, and a she-goat of 3 years old, and a ram of 3 years old, and a turtle dove, and a young pigeon. Now, let me tell you something. You might be reading this and going, what's all this about? Abram was so excited. He's like, woo-hoo! Now we're getting to business. Because now Abram was going to be able to get involved. See, before, Abram's just kind of a passenger on this train. Now God says, I want you to get me these 5 animals. And Abram knew what was going to happen. Abram, listen very carefully. I'm going to use a phrase here that I'm going to probably say again and again, and I want you to understand it. Abram was about to cut a covenant. You ever heard that somebody's about to cut a deal? You ever heard that phrase? It comes from this idea of cutting a covenant. Now, a covenant and a contract are different. Sue, do you have a mobile phone? Susie, do you have a mobile phone? Yeah. Are you on contract? Mm-hmm. Who are you on contract with? O2? Do you know why they have a contract with you? Because they don't trust you. They think that at the earliest convenient, you won't pay, or you're going to try to reduce payment, or you're going to try to change things, so they don't trust you. So they have a contract. By the way, it's interesting. It's a great contract for them. They could break any aspect of it, and you're still stuck. That's another point. But that's a contract. A contract is if you're in a contract with somebody, both parties can decide not to be part of it, but it's really, I don't trust you. And therefore, I need a legal document that's going to make sure you're going to do what you promised to do. A covenant is different. A covenant is, I promise that I will keep my part. And the way you cut a covenant is you get animals. And after you kill them, you cut them in half. And you lay one half over here and one half over here. So it was a 3-year-old bull, right? Heifer. One side over here, one side over here. A 3-year she-goat. One half over here, one half over here. A ram of 3 years. One half over here, one half over here. 2 birds. You really can't cut a bird in half. So you're just going to put one over there and one over there. And then you walk through it. You walk right in the middle of it. And you say what the covenant is, and if I don't keep my side, may what happened to these animals happen to me. The wedding covenant, interestingly enough, when the bride and groom are coming down the aisle and back up, it is a covenant. The families are split in two, and they're making a covenant, not a contract, a covenant that they're going to keep their wedding vows. Both sides are witness. I mean, a covenant is a very serious deal, and Abram's excited because, hey, before he wasn't sure what God is doing. Now, if there's a covenant, this is ironclad. Look at Jeremiah chapter 34. Let me just kind of show you how serious a covenant was. Isaiah, Jeremiah. Jeremiah 34. Isn't Jeremiah the passage that also says, I know the thoughts I have towards you, they're good thoughts? Yeah, they haven't read this whole chapter because that verse was for a very specific thing. Because in Jeremiah 34, verse 18, it says, and I will give the men that have transgressed my covenants, which have not performed the words of the covenant which they have made before me, when they cut the calf in twain and passed between the parts, the prince of Judah and the princes of Jerusalem, the eunuchs, the priests, and all the people of the land, which passed between the parts of the calf, I will give them into the hand of their enemies, and into the hand of them that seek their life, and their dead bodies shall be for meat unto the fowls of the heaven, and to the beasts of the earth. By the way, that Jeremiah passage, I know the thoughts I have for you. This is a reminder that even though all these terrible things are going to happen, I'm not done with you. So we need to make sure we don't throw that verse around all willy-nilly. But God and Abram were about to make a covenant. Verse 10, Abram was so excited, he does it. Look what he says in verse 10. And he took him all these and divided them in the midst, and laid each piece one against another, and the birds he divided not. And when the fowls came upon the carcasses, Abram drove them away. Hey, Abram was an honorable man, right? By the way, let's get a time frame here. At night is when God says, Abram, fear not. Right? God says, this is what's going to happen. So Abram goes and does this, I would say immediately. And we're going to see that this process is taking anywhere probably between 12 and 16 hours. Do you remember when Abram's asking how long? I mean, here Abram is, and he's waiting on God, and he's done everything necessary. Now he's waiting for God to show up so he could do the covenant, and he's shooing away the birds. He was not derelict in his duty. He was keeping the covenant pieces pristine, and he was doing everything he could. And listen, Christian, we had the same problem as Abram. We think that we've got to do our part in order for God to do his part. I love what that, I said this before, I love what that little boy said when he got baptized. And he said, how did you get saved? And the little boy said, I did my part and God did his part. The preacher said, what? And the little boy said, I did the sinning and he did the saving. You've done your part. Verse 12 says, and when the sun was going down, he was woken up in the middle of the night. He's doing this all during the day. Now the sun's going down. Abram was not a lazy man. Abram was doing his part. But do you think he thought God was going to show up a little sooner? Do you think that maybe that's been his problem the whole time? God, how long? The sun's going down, the Bible says, and when the sun was going down, verse 12, a deep sleep fell upon Abram, and lo, a great horror of great darkness fell upon him. The sun's going down, and Abram's saying, where's God? And I think God made it very clear as to what Abram was to do in his instructions. But he was still in no rush to meet Abram's expectations. God was teaching Abram the first part of the lesson. God will do what he says, but his timetable will be different than ours. This is why we're told to wait on the Lord. God doesn't wait on us. By the way, do you see that phrase in verse 12, a deep sleep? When it's translated in the Septuagint, you may not know what the Septuagint is. Before the time of Christ, when everything was the Greek world, before it was the Roman world, it was the Greek world. And they did a Greek translation of the Hebrew Scriptures so the world can know the Hebrew Scriptures. And the Septuagint, it's sometimes abbreviated by the letters LXX, which is 70, which is rounding down. There are 72 translators. So the Septuagint, the 70. When they translated this, they chose the Greek word where we get the word ecstasy. It was used. See, they need to show that he just wasn't tired and took a nap. But something else was going on. When Adam had his rib removed, the Bible says that he went into a deep sleep. Same word. This word, and by the way, do you think Adam just, took a little nap? I think something else was going on. I think something supernatural was going on. In the New Testament, that word ecstasy is used when it says that Peter was in a trance and he saw a sheet come down from heaven. It's also used when Paul says, I was in a trance and I was caught up into the third heaven. Do you remember these words? Now, let's get away from the Hindu mysticism of trance where they're sitting cross-legged saying Om. That's not what's going on. It means that they are supernaturally seeing something that they wouldn't normally be able to see. And that their contact with this world is a little different. Okay? Some people say, no, he really was asleep. This is why I don't think it was just a vision. Let me tell you why. Did Abram was Abram actually commanded to actually cut apart animals? Yes or no? It seems like this is going to be a very physical event. If this was going to happen in a vision, he could have just slept that night and a vision happened while him doing all these things. But that's not what happened. He actually was involved in something. And it seems that God made Abram incapable of doing his part in the covenant. I think this is the reason why he was filled with great horror. Remember, God says, split the animals, and God says, Abram says, yeah, I sure will. He's excited because now he gets to do a covenant with God. He gets to do his part. And God says, oh, by the way, you're not going to be a part of this. And it says, great horror. A covenant, all the other times in the history of the world, involves two parties. Abram must be thinking, what kind of covenant is this if I can't be a part? He can't move. He's seeing what's going on, and he can't move. Christian, stop thinking that we need to do our part so God can do his. Understand that there is no verse that says God helps those who helps themselves. There's probably not a more satanic phrase out there. God helps those who can't help themselves. That's what salvation is all about. Philippians chapter 1, verse 6. Philippians chapter 1 and verse 6 says, being confident of this very thing, that he which began a good work in you will what? Perform it unto the day of Jesus Christ. If you were ever curious about how long your salvation lasts, if God started it, he promises to finish it. Your stupidity can't stop it. Verse 13, and he said unto Abram, know of a surety that thy seed shall be a stranger in a land that is not theirs, and shall serve them, and they shall afflict them for 400 years. Little side note, Abram, if you think you've waited a little bit of time for this promise to be kept, I just want you to buckle up, because it's going to be 400 years that they're going to be tormented in Egypt. By the way, interesting thing, Exodus says that they're in Egypt for how many years? 430. So what's going on here? Is it 400 or 430? Which one is it? Well, it says here, not that they're going to be in Egypt for 400 years, but that they're going to be afflicted, tormented for 400 years. Remember, when Israel got to Egypt, it wasn't bad at first. Probably lasted about, 30 years. And then there arose a Pharaoh that didn't know Joseph. That probably took, about 30 years? Hence the difference. And that did not mean Israel was forsaken. But let me ask you a question. When Moses is penning this down, do you think there were times that the nation of Israel thought they were forsaken of God? How long until you're going to keep your promise, God? I love that God wrote this so that we would understand that he doesn't just get to his promise whenever. He has a divine timetable. And I said this before. It's easy to get in Egypt, but it takes a long time to get Egypt out of you. And I think that's the reason why it took 400 years. They were in slavery, and they were finally free. And do you remember what happened as soon as they're free? We go back to Egypt. They had some really nice onions there and some leeks. Really? Has anybody in here ever been part of a Passover Seder? So one of the things you do And as a kid, I was involved in this. But it comes time to eat the bitter herbs. And us kids, we would just kind of take a little bit of leaf and chew it. So it was terrible. The men grab a handful, a fistful. They're chewing it. They're crying. I mean, honestly, tears are coming out of their face. And God says, I want you to have a meal of bitter herbs. Why? I want you to remember how bitter Egypt was. I want you to remember that when you're wanting to go back into Egypt, you look at your wrists and you see the scars of the shackles on you, and you look at your children that haven't yet had shackles, and you remember the bitterness, and you don't go back. God then says in verse 14, and also that nation whom they shall serve will I judge. And afterward they shall come out with great substance. And thou shalt go to thy fathers in peace. Thou shalt be buried in a good old age. Abram, don't worry, you're not about to die. I've got plenty of time to keep my promise. And your nation's going to be amazing. Verse 16, but in the fourth generation they shall come hither again. For the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet full. I can't judge the Amorites yet. See, God's not just working on you, He's also working on other people. And so sorry that God just can't, when you snap, say, yes, what can I do for you? He's not a genie in a bottle. He's the sovereign Lord of the universe. And He says, and it shall come to pass that when the sun, the Bible says, verse 17, and it came to pass that when the sun went down and it was dark, behold, a smoking furnace and a burning lamp that passed between those pieces. God makes the covenants. Abram hears the covenant being spoken by God, and now God begins to walk or go through as a burning lamp and a smoking furnace. Remember anything? Maybe at the Red Sea, a pillar of fire and a pillar of smoke. Remember when the temple was purified? Pillar of fire, pillar of smoke. God is making this covenant, and He's trying to teach Abram, and He's trying to teach us, man is incapable of making a covenant that lasts for eternity. John MacArthur said, if you could lose your salvation, you would. God is the promise keeper. We just need to be the promise takers. God is teaching Abram something very, very serious here. Abram, you cannot depend on yourself. You cannot depend on what you can do. Abram, I am the Lord thy God. I am the one that started this. I will bring it to completion. Christian, God is the one that has called you, and God will complete it. And yes, I get that there's some areas in your life that you don't understand why it's going on. You don't understand why you don't have victory. You don't understand why things aren't different. But I promise you, the God who called you is the God who is still vested in you, is the God who is still doing things in your life. And He says, I've begun a good work and I will complete it. Does it look like the world is winning out here? Doesn't it? Have you ever passed the billboard? They're not glorifying the Lord Jesus Christ, I promise you that. Matter of fact, you drive far enough on the M5, M6, M4, most of the M's. I'm now beginning to see on tractor trailers, on those trailers, there is one God, but Allah, and Muhammad is His prophet. And I wonder, Lord, is it okay if I buy some spray paint and Do a little bit of redecoration? No, that's wrong. Don't do it. I'm not hinting. If you're watching this on video, don't do it either, okay? But it doesn't feel like the world's winning. Excuse me, it doesn't feel like we're winning. It feels like the world's winning. Remember when you could talk to somebody about Christianity and they wouldn't get all mad? They might say no, but it's getting darker. Christian, God's not shocked. And that doesn't mean we slow down. Keep trusting his promise. By the way, verse 18, in the same day, the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, unto thy seed will I give this land, and the river of Egypt unto the great river Euphrates. Here's a side note. That's the Nile in Egypt to the Euphrates in Iraq. Is that where Israel is today? No. Israel's got part of it, but Israel doesn't have all of it. And doesn't it seem impossible that Israel can even get all that back? Yeah. That's how cool God is. Verse 19, the Kenites and the Kenizzites and the Cadmonites and the Hittites and the Pezerites and the mosquito bites and the ant bites and the Raphaims and the Amorites and the Canaanites and the Girgashites and the Jebusites. They're all going to be gone. That's all going to be yours. Christian, one thought for you. I've given you a few things to think about. But how many of you just can't wait till his kingdom comes? It's great, right? But you also know what that means? There's no more chances. Judgment will be on the lost. The sheep will be separated from the goats. And the Lion of Judah will judge the nations. Listen, when we pray that, and we need to pray it earnestly, but just know that maybe the reason why God is extending it, or at least to us, is because of his great mercy. Aren't you glad his kingdom didn't come before you got saved? Aren't you glad you got a chance? He's good. He's long-suffering. And he's God. And he sees what's right. We're not sovereign. He is. Let's pray. Father, thank you, God, for that you are the only one that can be depended